He's going to give us his vision for the future, near future of commercial space. Please welcome Alan Stern.
Great. Well, I'm not sure about how valuable any such vision would be. In fact, I think I'm probably the least qualified person to speak to you all about the topic that I'm actually going to talk about. But I thought it would be fun to take a look ahead. I'll tell you that when I was at NASA headquarters, I used to regularly caution Mike Griffin that if we didn't do this just right, that the vision for space exploration would shortly become the hallucination for space exploration. And in fact, it largely did become just that. So this may be a hallucination as well, but I wanted to talk a little bit. I thought what I'd do is just look ahead 15 years, the middle of the 2020s, and think for myself, where do I expect the new space, human spaceflight economy to be? What's the view that I might have? And if I'm speaking to younger people in the audience, those of you who will be, let's say, 40 in 2025, those of you who will be the entrepreneurs and the movers and the shakers in the middle of the next decade, what might you expect? So I'm going to talk about 2 or 3 different things. I hesitate to say give advice because I don't want to give advice, but I'm going to certainly talk to you about what I think. Some of it will be controversial, I hope, and then we'll have time for Q&A. So I'm going to start with a prediction. I have to do this or you can't see what I'm talking about. So that's the title of my talk, and I'm going to start with a prediction. And the prediction is really simple. If you're waiting for Godot, Godot isn't coming. I heard a lot of talk this morning at this meeting. It actually surprised me, but I've never been in this setting before. But I was surprised at how many people are interested in having the government fund our visions. Now, I understand having the government fund our vision to put boots in regolith in faraway places. But for commercial space flight, I'm becoming more and more pessimistic about that. And I'll tell you why. Does that work? Here's why. There. Why do you think I'm pessimistic? Have you been reading the newspapers the last few weeks about Cruiser, about commercial space, about LEO taxis? Did you listen to what Muncie told you about the nightmares that it takes and the disinformation that people are telling about, what we all think is obvious? Exactly. Wait till you get on the Constitution Avenue, right? Here's why Godot isn't coming. Right? Too many cooks in the kitchen, too many other priorities. What looks like a straight shot for you to connect 2 dots, this is obviously a good program. We'll do more for less. Makes a lot of sense if you're coming at it from the perspective that many of us do. But if you're coming at it from this perspective of every other November, my job is at stake. My job is to protect my constituents. There are thousands of jobs at stake from this new upstart program, and whether it delivers or not, the program that we have here, the real families that are working here, could be out on the street. They will be very unhappy with me as your representative. I'm here to protect you, and so it's for exactly this reason that I think Godot isn't coming. And I would urge all of us to try to think more about how we do new space without thinking of the government as writing the checks, even to get it booted up. Now, that's a tall order. I realize that. But I want to make some predictions about where I think human spaceflight could be in 2025. I hope these aren't laughable to you. I tried to actually think what I thought was a realistic model. Now, I don't have any study that we've done based on this. This isn't a Futron study, for example, or Zogby, or it's not based on analysis. This is my gut feel for the upper envelope of what you might expect 15 years from now, beyond which I would personally find laughable. So I think it's reasonable that in the suborbital sector that we could see second-generation vehicles. So think of it as a Spaceship 3 or something like that, a second-generation suite of vehicles that are flying with seat prices around $30,000. I think that's as far as you can expect. That's like buying a car. I think you could expect to see worldwide perhaps 10 to 20 flights a day across the entirety of the market. And if the vehicles are carrying 6 or 10 people, then you're going to see 60 to 200 seats a day at 30K. That works out, just do the arithmetic, over the course of a year to a market that's in the range of roughly $1 to $2 billion. The numbers are there. I also think that it's reasonable on suborbital to expect 15 years from now that we will be sort of at the X Prize stage, or maybe closer to where we are now with point-to-point. I don't think we'll see it sooner. I don't personally believe in 15 years there will be a point-to-point established market with people buying tickets to head over to Sydney in 45 minutes. I don't think we're going to be there. Look at how hard it's been to bring online these first-generation vehicles. In 2004, Richard Branson teamed immediately to make the spaceship company. And the week after he announced it publicly and said, we expect to be flying tourists by 2007, I was visiting with Burt Rutan, who said, I can't believe he said that, right? We'll be very lucky to be flying by 2009 or 10. And in fact, we're not flying in 2010 with revenue flights, but although we're very close. Now, how about on the orbital side? I think it's reasonable that we could expect to see station taxis, the kind of thing that Mr. Obama and company are trying to catalyze. I think you could expect to see upper limit, and I think this would be amazing if we had it, once per week with a vehicle that flies 6 people at $10 million a seat for a price point. Richard Garriott will tell you that he made $9 million on his $35 million flight. And Richard likes to say, a lot of people think that's not so smart. I spent $35 million to make 9. He goes, but you know what that means? When the prices drop to around 9, I can fly as often as I want, because it wasn't that hard to drum up $9 million. So I could expect, with this volume of market, I think it's technically feasible. I think there's a market there. I think Mr. Bigelow's studies are correct, that if you can slice it up in time and in space, look at the ISS, it's full. It's very hard to imagine, just from a consumable standpoint, or from a room on the station standpoint, really expanding it very much without very large investments to put up a lot more modules, a lot more power, et cetera. So I think Bigelow's going to have a market. I think there'll be others like him by 15 years from now if he's successful. I think you, as an upper limit, might expect flights once a week in LEO taxis. I wouldn't be surprised if it was a tenth that. That would still be between 1 and 2 orders of magnitude beyond what we're doing today. And I think that we could, in principle, have as many as 3 LEO stations. They probably have different capabilities. Some would be more rustic than the others. And if you're charging about $3 million per person week, and you imagine those 3 stations can support 20 people between them, then that's about a $3 billion a year market, just like the LEO taxi market. And that number is not very different from, I'm sorry, thank you very much. I'm having trouble. I punch this and it doesn't work every time. So you're a slide behind me. Try again. Do we have another hand controller? That one goes backwards. That's good. Let's try again. There we are. That's what I've been talking about. Thanks very much. All right, now we're ahead, so let's talk about beyond LEO. I think that eventually Space Adventures or somebody else will start selling lunar figure 8s, and I know that there are people who would be interested in talking about it. If you could fly that a couple times a year with a couple of passengers, you might have a respectable business line. Let's see if I can routinely make this go forward. Yeah, so let's add it up. You added up all those numbers. Upper limit, I think, without the giggle factor, is a $10 billion a year commercial human spaceflight market. Maybe half that, maybe a quarter of that. Maybe if we're not safe and people get hurt a lot, it won't be anything like that. But I think $10 billion is at the upper limit of what we might realistically expect. That's a pretty healthy market, but let's put it in perspective. In fact, the launch vehicle market today worldwide is about $10 billion. So that's pretty respectable business to grow commercial human spaceflight to that level. But if you compare it to the ComSat industry, they're well over $100 billion a year in revenues, and the airline industry is 5-6 times that size. So this is a small business by scale of larger economic enterprises that are sort of applicable models in aerospace. But I think it would be very healthy if we could be in a situation like that. What might amp it up beyond that? What would be the next stage? Well, the first thing you always think of, at least I do coming from a technical background, is what are the technologies that could really revolutionize this? What could make launch a lot cheaper? And you all probably know a lot more than I do, but I can't think of a technology that could come online by 2025 that could change this equation. Of course, sometimes things are just around the corner and we don't see it. And that's not a bad thing, but just thinking linearly ahead from the developments that I know are in the laboratory today, I don't see anything that's going to make spaceflight a factor of 10 cheaper on the technology side. And it primarily boils down to launch, doesn't it? Because everything comes down to getting things to LEO. And if you see something, write me an email. I'd be interested in knowing what it is, or maybe I can watch it on the web Sunday. So but let's take a look at what might revolutionize it. I think what might revolutionize our ability to do human spaceflight commercially is a change in the way we do practices. Now, again, Jim Muncie was onto something when he was talking about a different way of doing contracting. So the feedback loops work to get a lean set of processes instead of a fat set of processes. Okay, like fixed price contracting is a good example. But if we can get to lean and we can get to high volume so we get to economies of scale, we'll go a lot of the way down the cost curve. And when I say lean, I'm thinking, for example, of a story which is not made up, that the entire Falcon launch system was developed on about as much money as the $400 million launch tower for Ares 1. That's pretty impressive. You know, I remember struggling to build an imaging infrared spectrometer for a planetary mission about this large, and it cost $30 million, and we delivered it about the same time that Burt Rutan took $30 million and turned it into the design, development, and execution of a human spaceflight program for suborbital, right? I was using standard aerospace practices, and Burt was being really smart about things. But the second thing is we have to drive that demand by having investors who think of killer apps. We've got to find new applications in spaceflight that really make a lot of money, because that's what will drive this economy, when there's demand for those applications. I think it's you in the audience that are likely to be the kind of people that will think of those things. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a slide or two. But I also want to say that I think that there's a market out there for near space access. And if we could get the prices to visit a place that looks like space, for example, on a balloon at 100,000 feet all day long with your family for the price of a European vacation, or to spend the night in a near space hotel where you don't have to do it propulsively, and you don't get the zero gravity, but you sure get the blackness of space, and you look out over the entirety of the United States. For like the price you would take your family today on zero-G airplane for zero-G Corp, I think that would be a really hot product. I think a lot of people would want to do that. I think you could sell a lot of rides. I have no idea if it's technically possible, but it sure sounds like it would be something a lot of people would be interested in. So I'm actually making it go forward. So what might some of those apps be that could be killer apps? Well, I actually have a couple of ideas which I'm not going to tell you because I'm working on them. But I'm thinking about exploration and entertainment, and I'm thinking that there's a lot there. Look, my cable system has 700 channels, and nothing's ever on, right? And they have to fill all that content, right? And we have very high bandwidth communications, and ever since Gutenberg, the bandwidth curve is only upward and upward. So I think that there are a lot of opportunities to marry exploration and entertainment, all kinds of it. You'll see it a lot in terrestrial exploration as well. And I think if people start thinking about spaceflight that way, they'll find some applications. And they may be able to find some very innovative ways to do that. I think a lot of people are going to make money surrounding the spaceports. Probably the best business to be in if you want to be in, if you want to make a small amount of money into a large amount of money without much risk in the space business, is to be a restaurateur in southern New Mexico in the next few years. right? Or open a movie theater down there right by Spaceport America, right? Or a hotel, because every one of those space tourists is going to bring their entire family along. And because they can afford a flight like this, you know their family is going to be out looking for things to do during the week. And it's going to be 10 to 1. For every tourist that comes through, there's going to be 10 family members or friends. And plus, they're going to be the onlookers and all the other things that go with that. I think around those spaceports, there's a lot of opportunity to make money. And for those of you who are charitable, I mean charitable in the sense of, say, a Jeff Bezos, who really isn't charitable, but he made a lot of money selling books and then other things, and now is selling Kindles like hotcakes, and he turned it into a human spaceflight program. So he made his money another way, and then he came back to where his heart was in wanting to see space exploration proceed. For those of you who have that mindset, that you'd really like to see us advance through the 21st century, make your money somewhere else and then go spend it on your dreams. That's a proven model that's working for us today in NewSpace. And by the way, as a scientist and a guy that used to run all 93 spaceflight missions for science in NASA, from earth science to heliophysics to astrophysics, I can tell you that's a third of NASA's budget, and I don't know a single new space business that's for profit that's working in that market. Now, maybe there's some of you that are doing that. I'm just not aware of it, but I think that's a huge untapped market. Look at how many people wanted to do SETI at home. Somebody could monetize something like that. Look at Moon Zoo as an example. There got to be a lot of projects where people who sit at home, want to get into databases, want to help, want to be vicariously a researcher, want to find educational products associated with data sets, want to, look, there's an app that you can buy that if you don't have a fireplace, it's a fireplace for you, right? Anybody that'll buy that is bound to buy something like Great Views of the Earth, or you think it up. But I think that in the science market, people don't think about monetizing it. The federal government is putting over $5 billion a year into Science Mission Directorate. There must be spinoffs that NewSpace can make out of that. That 10 years from now, maybe 5 years from now, people will look back and go, of course, this was an untapped market, and why didn't I see it? Why wasn't I in there first? So I would encourage you to think about that as well. So now a couple of closing thoughts on how we might build a stable, successful new space industry. The first is try to think of ways to do this without any government help at all. And try to think of ways where you can win on volume, not flying one tourist right to the moon, although I do think that that'll be a successful business. But I think if you could think of how to do very large numbers of people or very large numbers of people hours, or very large numbers of experiments, payloads, souvenirs, cremains. And I'm telling you things you already know. I want you to go out and think of those ideas. But think about winning on volume without government entanglements, and think about space a little differently. I would encourage you that instead of thinking, I have to invent a launch vehicle and a spacecraft, or I have to invent a spacecraft and buy expensive launch vehicles, think mom and pop. There are a lot of smart people in this community, and not very many of them are thinking about how could I start a space business for the same price I would start, let's say, a family Italian restaurant for a few $100,000. And of course, we live in a world where a lot of the economy is driven by things that are just software. So if you could think of software apps that relate to space, or you could think of entertainment apps that relate to space, or you probably think of better ideas than I have, I think that there's a lot of room for mom and pop instead of thinking of, the barrier to entry is I need hundreds of millions of dollars or more, or I can't be a space entrepreneur. Think at the very bottom end. And I think people will make lots of successful mom and pop businesses, and some of them will even grow to be much larger than that. But we tend to limit ourselves, I think, by thinking, how do I get $500 million so I can get started? Instead of, what would I do if I went to the bank like Tim Pickens, and I have this great idea for an app to do with some science mission, or I have something tourists could do when they're in space that I could sell them or rent them or lease them or help them get a better experience, right? And they paid $100,000, so they're very likely to want to pay a few $100s for something that enhances their experience. And I can sell a lot of those, and I can make a secondary market. So those are the kind of things that I would encourage you to think about, because to have a really successful new space environment 15 years from now, I think it's going to take the normal logarithmic distribution of businesses. It can't all be top-heavy giants. You have to also have the medium and the small scale and the mom and pop scale businesses. So this is a picture I'd like you to imagine is taken in 2025. It looks just like a picture that could have been taken in 1965. And in 1965, people wanted to make this place very special. We have an opportunity to do that, but it is entirely up to us. We have to show people that there's a market out there, and then more will come because they will see it as an economic opportunity, just like the computer revolution. If you want to get to from the picture on the left, which is where NewSpace is today, to the picture on the right, which I thought would be the case by 2001, then it has to start right here. And so I will close with saying, if we can spark that revolution, if we can get from the left picture to that right picture, then our successors will make this come true too. Thank you very much. And I suppose if there are any questions, we probably have a few minutes. Yes, sir.
I just want to make a comment. As to the technology, look to skyhooks, basically cable in space. I'm sorry. As to the advanced technology to lower launch costs, look to skyhooks. It's simply a cable in space with the center traveling at orbital velocity. The part of the cable that's pointed to the Earth is traveling at suborbital velocity.
Over here.
Yeah, I asked you one this morning, Alan, so if there's anyone else who wants to ask a question. I'll go real quick. So killer apps. You won't tell us what your idea for a killer app is. Can you tell us what the characteristics of killer apps that won't work are? I mean, for years we've heard, at first it was going to be solar power satellites driving space colonies, and then perfect ball bearings and protein crystallization. Is there anything that you can tell us specifically what to look for to discard an idea before pursuing it?
That's a really good question, and I have an answer, actually. So far, in the 50 years of space exploration, the most successful businesses have been those that figured out how to avoid launch costs to make most of their money. Okay, and the ComSats are the primary example of that, and there are now secondary markets like commercial remote sensing, where you put a small facility in space, and then you lift ones and zeros back for the cost of an electric bill, and you make money day after day and month after month, right? Whereas the cost of building ball bearings and bringing them back is very high. So I would say don't think atoms, think bits. Think of ways to do things that involve information coming from or exploited from space in one way or another. It may not be as sexy as having your own launch company, but I think it's probably easier. Yes.
This is following up on Maston's answer earlier, which everybody giggled at. But there's a book out called Sex in Space, and it claims that's the killer app. Thoughts?
Let's see. My first thought is that I was advising a suborbital company about an idea I won't tell you because it was under NDA, and I told them it was the killer app, and they said, "Please don't ever use the word killer with our business." So that's the first thing that comes to mind. I am sure someone will do that. I know that Virgin made a point of turning down an opportunity to do that early in their flight program. I don't think that's going to be the thing that drives the new space revolution. It may be a viable niche market. Somebody will do at some point. I just don't see that as driving us forward to the stars.
A friend of mine who's fairly successful in business said he was surprised at how long it took him to realize that unsexy is profitable. I mean, sewage pumps are profitable. Rocket engine pumps are not. How do we find businesses that are anti-sexy and therefore much more likely to be profitable?
I think you're onto something, but I don't have an answer for you. But that's another way of saying some of the things I was saying about think mom and pop and lower the barrier to entry to where we need to try a lot more ideas, I think. But to do that, you have to put a lot more noodle power in to actually think of what could I do as a space business that I could start for $50,000 or $100,000, right? That might yield multiples of a factor of 100 or a factor of 1,000 on that, right? And we don't typically think that way. You have to think hard. What I can tell you is the group that I've been working with, once we started to find some ideas, that there were many like it. And there are many more than we can possibly accomplish. But I'm not going to tell you what they are. Other people who think hard will probably come upon the same ideas. And I think some of them will eventually work, and they'll work big. And in hindsight, it'll look like it was there all the time lying in front of you. Anybody else? Okay.
Which is the president's speech in Florida, and then it was the frontispiece of the National Space Policy, talks about the goal is the capacity to live longer off planet and eventually more sustainably and even indefinitely. That is probably going to be a lot more about recycling and human physiology than about rockets. And that should be as scary as it is to old space right now. Any observations?
Not directly, but since I have the podium, I will say that I actually think that even the Obama program is a kind of Apollo redo, that they aren't really thinking out of the box. And when I was still in Washington during the election, I thought a lot about what a really different NASA would do. And I was asked this morning about the term ubiquitous spaceflight and what I meant by it. I think a perfectly legitimate goal for a NASA that's completely different from getting exploration done with human beings would be to make spaceflight ubiquitous. For NASA to drive it to where the numbers are more like the numbers of 1920s aviation and the prices are similar. And that would be an amazing goal for the space agency to tackle with its ingenuity and its talents. We're not going in that direction, but I suspect that whether it's through our own devices in NewSpace or through what future incarnations of NASA will do, that at some point making spaceflight ubiquitous is more important than making it possible to live there a long time, because the latter will come from the former. Okay, thank you again very much.